Oh, the car emancipation rides majestic through our nation, bearing on its train the story, liberty, our nation's glory. Rolling along, rolling along, rolling along through the nation, freedom's car emancipation.
You are listening to the song Get Off the Track, performed by the Dutchess Anti-Slavery Singers. The song was written by Lynn's own Hutchinson Family Singers. The Hutchinson Family Singers were noted abolitionists who traveled the states performing songs of anti-slavery. Their other causes included temperance,
get out the way, get out the way,
and women's suffrage. At Hutchinson's request, the city erected the Stone Tower Observatory, which replaced the previous structure, which had been destroyed by fire. The prominent Hutchinson family built a home and several other cottages on the lower part of the site. Our city is proud of the Hutchinson family, and we are also proud of our adopted favorite son, escaped slave turned abolitionist Frederick Douglass, who lived in Lynn with his family from 1841 to 1848. Year one was a modest affair, with a few dozen citizens under a tarp in the rain. Over the decade, the event has grown to become a family day of music, food, and fireworks. But the main event is the community reading of Frederick Douglass's famous speech, 44 paragraphs read in sequence by diverse citizens of Lynn. In 2020, the year of the COVID-19 pandemic and protests working to end systemic racism, our 10th milestone reading is produced on video to ally with social distancing protocols. It is also an opportunity to capture for posterity a snapshot record of what has traditionally been an ephemeral event. People will look back and say, "What did you do during the pandemic?" Hello, this is Wendy Joseph, founder and coordinator of the Frederick Douglass event in Lynn. In 2011, with a grant from Mass Humanities, we initiated this community reading of the famous Frederick Douglass speech, The Meaning of the 4th of July to the Slave. While the original speech ran hours in length, Mass Humanities has prepared a shortened version for our uses today. We have delivered that speech on 9 consecutive July 3rds, when the city of Lynn observes the occasion with fireworks over the harbor at dusk, to remind us of the pain and the cruelty upon which our country was built, and how far we have yet to go to meet with the true hope of equality that Douglass spent his life fighting for. We present this video featuring 44 Lynners reading the words of Frederick Douglass on this, our 10th anniversary. Frederick Douglass was both a writer and a man of action. We hope that you will hear the demands for dignity in the streets today echoed in the words of history, and take up the cause to combat systemic racism, institutional violence, and police brutality, for which Douglass had a simple command: agitate, agitate, agitate. Council President Cyr and Lynn Mayor Thomas M. McGee will commemorate this occasion with some opening remarks. But first, I am proud to present a special message from a descendant of Frederick Douglass.
Hello, my name is Kenneth B. Morris Jr., and I'm the great-great-great-grandson of Frederick Douglass, and I'm also the great-great-grandson of Booker T. Washington and president of the Frederick Douglass Family Initiatives. We're an abolitionist and anti-racist organization with a mission to build strong children and to end systems of exploitation and oppression. In his 1881 article, The Color Line, Frederick Douglass said that few evils are less accessible to the force of reason or more tenacious of life and power than a long-standing prejudice. He considered racism a moral disorder that distorts perception according to its own diseased imagination. As the COVID-19 virus approached our shores several months ago, we were warned that people with pre-existing condition would be more adversely affected. Only in the United States have we seen that the deadliest of these pre-existing conditions is the institutionalized racism that infects our country. On July 5th, 1852, Frederick Douglass gave one of the greatest speeches in American history. It was a keynote address delivered at an Independence Day celebration held by the Ladies Anti-Slavery Society at Corinthian Hall in Rochester, New York. In the speech, my great ancestor thundered, "What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him, more than all other days in the year, the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim." He continued on, "Your shout of liberty and equality, hollow mockery, your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgivings, with all your religious parade and solemnity, are to him mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy, a thin veil to cover up crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages. There is not a nation on this earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of the United States at this very hour." It was a scathing speech in which he admonished the nation, "This 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice. I must mourn." 160 years later, Black people still struggle mightily under poverty, mass incarceration, disparities in healthcare and educational and economic opportunity, racial profiling, and police brutality. One only must look at the astounding poverty rates for people of color in this country to realize that things are not exactly equal. We continue to pay the price for policy failures that have compromised our health and disproportionately impacted our educational and economic opportunities. During this COVID-19 health and financial crisis, these disparities will become increasingly exposed. This nation is still guilty of crimes that would disgrace any nation at this very hour. Each year on July 4th, my ancestor's speech is commemorated at organized community readings around the country. People are always stunned at how prescient and timeless his words are, and how the speech continues to pierce our collective soul and resonate in today's divisive and hate-filled climate. This COVID-19 pandemic has disproportionately wreaked havoc on Black and Brown communities and taken the lives of so many of our dear brothers and sisters. As we read the speech together this July 4th, I hope we all take the time to consider how much work still needs to be done to fight against injustice and inequality. When you breathe its last sentence, I want you to examine your own soul and ask yourself if you are complicit in allowing the disease of racism and injustice to thrive and exist because you sit unwilling or afraid to speak out. It is vitally important this election year that we use our voice, pen, keyboard, and our vote at the local, state, and federal level. It is critical that we hold our elected officials accountable for their decisions and inactions and demand that they take the necessary steps to identify, advocate against, and eliminate policies that undergird structural racism and inequity in this country. Near the end of the great abolitionist's life, a young boy approached him in the streets and asked what advice he would give to a young man interested in joining the fight against injustice. According to the story, Douglass responded without hesitation, "Agitate, agitate, agitate." This statement captures his life's work. He spoke truth to power. He railed against the hypocrisy of the slave-holding Christian power for promoting ideals of freedom, liberty, and equality for all while enslaving human beings on its blood-drenched soil. He pressed President Lincoln to do better and to move quicker toward the abolition of slavery. He was always agitating. I encourage you to read and absorb this speech this July 4th, and then get out there and agitate, agitate, agitate.
Hi, I'm Darren Cyr, City Council President. I'm also Ward 3 City Councilor. Wendy's asked me to say a few words about Frederick Douglass and what he means to me and to the city. probably one of the most important individuals in the history of America. And the reason that we're sitting here in front of the GAR is because this building really represents everything that Frederick Douglass stood for. Lynn's a pretty amazing city, and back in the 1800s, Frederick was, I was going to say asked to get off a train, but he was literally thrown off the train here in Lynn because of the color of his skin. Frederick was the kind of man who used words and what was in his heart to fight his battle. He didn't have guns and clubs and hoods and things like that. Everybody knew who he was and what he represented. America would not be America today if it wasn't for people like Frederick Douglass and the people who gave up their lives for the freedoms of all the American people that live here today. Doesn't matter what the color of your skin is, what your nationality is, your religion, your sexual preference, whether you're a man or a woman, we all should be treated equally. And that's what Frederick Douglass was all about. Equal for everybody. Thank you.
Welcome to this virtual reading of Frederick Douglass's speech, What to the Slave is the 4th of July. As the mayor and a lifelong citizen of Lynn, I am honored by the fact that Frederick Douglass wrote his first autobiography in 1845 while he lived here. The Library of Congress has included Douglass's The Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass in their list of the most influential books which shaped America. This former slave lived an extraordinary life. From escaping bondage to advocating for the freedom of slaves with Abraham Lincoln, Frederick Douglass was a pivotal figure in the abolitionist movement and never stopped fighting for justice. I appreciate the resolve shown by the Frederick Douglass event organizers to create this production. As we celebrate their milestone 10th year, it was important for us to record this video while keeping everyone safe during this pandemic. And now it is my honor and privilege to begin What to the Slave is 4th of July. Mr. President, friends and fellow citizens, the task before me is one which requires much previous thought and study for its proper performance. I do not remember ever to have appeared as a speaker before any assembly more shrinkingly, nor with greater distrust of my ability than I do this day. The papers and placards say that I am to deliver a 4th of July oration. The fact is, ladies and gentlemen, the distance between this platform and the slave plantation from which I escaped is considerable, and the difficulties to be overcome in getting from the latter to the former are by no means slight. That I am here today is to me a matter of astonishment as well as of gratitude.
This, for the purpose of this celebration, is the 4th of July. It is the birthday of your national independence and of your political freedom. This, to you, is what the Passover was to the emancipated people of God. It carries your minds back to the day and to the act of your great deliverance. This celebration also marks the beginning of another year of your national life. It reminds you that the Republic of America is now 76 years old. I am glad, fellow citizens, that your nation is so young. You are, even now, only in the beginning of your national career, still lingering in a period of childhood. I repeat, I am glad that this is so. There is hope in the thought, and hope is much needed under the dark clouds which lower above the horizon.
Fellow citizens, 76 years ago, the people of this country were British subjects. The style and the title of your sovereign people, in which now glory, was not then born. You were under British crown. Your fathers esteemed the English government as their home government. England as their fatherland, although considerable distance from your home, imposed in the exercise of its parental prerogatives upon its colony's children such restraint, burden, and limitations as in its mature judgment it deemed wise, right, and proper.
But your fathers, who had not adopted the idea of the infallibility of government and the absolute character of its acts, presumed to differ from the home government in respect to the wisdom and the justice of some of those burdens and restraints. They went so far as to pronounce the measures of government unjust, unreasonable, and oppressive, and altogether such as ought not to be quietly submitted to. I scarcely need say, fellow citizens, that my opinion of those measures fully accords with that of your fathers, feeling themselves harshly and unjustly treated by the home government. Your fathers, like men of honesty and men of spirit, earnestly sought redress. They petitioned and remonstrated. They did so in a decorous, respectful, and loyal manner. This, however, did not answer the purpose. They saw themselves treated with sovereign indifference, coldness, and scorn. Yet they persevered.
Oppression makes a wise man mad. Your fathers became restive under this treatment. They felt themselves the victims of grievous wrongs, wholly incurable in their colonial capacity.
With brave men, there is always a remedy for oppression. Just here, the idea of total separation of the colonies from the crown was born. It was a startling idea.
Much more so than we, at this distance of time, regard it. The timid and the prudent of that day were, of course, shocked and alarmed by it. Their opposition to the then dangerous thought was earnest and powerful.
But amid all their terror and the frightened vociferations against it, the alarming and revolutionary idea moved on, and the country with it.
El 2 de julio de 1776, el Congreso Continental, para la consternación de los amantes de la facilidad y de los adorados de la propiedad, alarmante y revolucionaria, lo hicieron por una forma muy revolucionaria. Casi nunca concebimos revoluciones que los creamos en nuestros días, que tienen significados mejores que la resolución del Congreso Continental. Resuelto que estas colonias unidas son correctos y deben ser estados independientes, libres, también son absueltos de la lealtad de la corona inglesa en su totalidad.
Citizens, your fathers made good that resolution. They succeeded, and today you reap the fruits of their success. The freedom gained is yours, and you therefore may properly celebrate this anniversary. The 4th of July is the first great fact in your nation's history, the very ring bolt in the chain of your yet undeveloped destiny.
Fellow citizens, I am not wanting in respect for the fathers of this republic. The signers of the Declaration of Independence were brave men. I cannot contemplate their great deeds with less than admiration. They were statesmen, patriots, and heroes, and for the good they did and the principles they contended for, I will unite with you to honor their memory.
They love their country better than their own private interests, and all will concede that it is a rare virtue that ought to command respect. He who will intelligently lay down his life for his country is a man whom it is not in human nature to despise. Your fathers staked their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor on the cause of this country.
They were peacemen, but they preferred revolution to peaceful submission to bondage. They were quiet men, but they did not shrink from agitating against oppression. They showed forbearance, but they knew its limits. They believed in order, but not in the order of tyranny. With them, nothing was settled that was not right. With them, justice, liberty, and humanity were final, not slavery and oppression. You may well cherish the memory of such men. They were great in their day and generation. Their solid manhood stands out the more as we contrast it with these degenerate times.
How circumspect, exact, and proportionate were all their movements. How unlike the politicians of an hour. Their statesmanship looked beyond the passing moment and stretched away in strength into the distant future, fully appreciate the hardship to be encountered, firmly believing in the right of their cause, wisely measuring the terrible odds against them. Your fathers, The fathers of this republic laid the cornerstone of the national superstructure, which has risen and still rises in grandeur around you. Of this fundamental work, this day is the anniversary.
My business, if I have any here today, is with the present. The accepted time with God and His cause is the ever-living now. We have to do with the past only as we can make it useful to the present and to the future. Now is the time, the important time. Your fathers have lived, died, and have done their work, and have done much of it well. You live and must die, and you must do your work. You have no right to enjoy a child's share in the labor of your fathers unless your children are to be blessed by your labors. You have no right to wear out and waste the hard-earned fame of your fathers to cover your indolence.
Fellow citizens, pardon me. Allow me to ask, why am I called upon to speak here today? What have I, or those I represent, to do with your national independence? Are the great principles of political freedom and of natural justice embodied in that Declaration of Independence extended to us? And am I therefore called upon to bring our humble offering to the national altar and to confess the benefits and express devout gratitude for the blessings from your independence to us?
Would to God, both for your sakes and ours, that an affirmative answer could be truthfully returned to these questions. Then would my task be light and my burden easy and delightful.
But such is not the state of the case. I say it with a sad sense of the disparity between us. I am not included with the pale of this glorious anniversary. Your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us.
The blessings in which this day rejoice are not enjoyed in common. The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you, not me. The sunlight that brought life and healing to you has brought stripes and death to me. This 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice, I must mourn. To drag a man in fetters into grand illuminated temple of liberty and call upon him to join you in joyous anthems were inhumane mockery and sacrilegious irony. Do you mean, citizens, to mock me by asking me to speak today? Fellow citizens, above your national tumultuous joy, I hear the mournful wails of millions whose chains heavy and grievous yesterday are today rendered more intolerable by the jubilee shouts that reach them.
My subject then, fellow citizens, is American slavery. I shall see from this day from the point of view of the slave, standing here identified with the American bondage, making his wrongs mine. I do not hesitate to declare with all my soul that the character and conduct of this nation never looked blacker to me than this 4th of July. Whether we turn to the declarations of the past or to the professions of the present, the conduct of this nation seems equally hideous and revolting. America is false to the past, false to the present, and solemnly binds herself false to the future.
Standing with God and the crushed and bleeding slaves on this occasion, I will, in the name of humanity, which is outraged, in the name of liberty, which is fettered, in the name of the Constitution and the Bible, which are disregarded and trampled upon, dare to call into question and to denounce with all of the emphasis I can command everything that serves to perpetuate slavery, the great sin and shame of America. I will not equivocate. I will not excuse. I will use the severest language I can command, and yet not one word shall escape me that any man whose judgment is not blinded by prejudice or whose heart is not a slaveholder shall not confess to be just and right.
I fancy I hear someone of my audience say, it is just in this circumstance that you and your brother abolitionists fail to make a favorable impression on the public mind. Would you argue more and denounce less? Would you persuade more and rebuke less? Your cause would be much more likely to succeed. But I submit, where all is plain, there is nothing to be argued. What point in the anti-slavery creed would you have me argue?
Must I undertake to prove that the slave is a man? The slaveholders themselves acknowledge it in the enactment of laws for their government. They acknowledge it when they punish disobedience on the part of the slave. There are 72 crimes in the state of Virginia, which, if committed by a black man, subject him to punishment of death, while only 2 of the same crimes will subject a white man to the like punishment. What is this but the acknowledgement that the slave is a moral, intellectual, and responsible being?
Southern statute books are covered with enactments forbidding under severe fines and penalties the teaching of the slave to read or write. When you can point to any such laws in reference to the beasts of the fields, then I may consent to argue the manhood of a slave. When the dogs in your streets, when the fowls in the air, when the cattle on your hills, when the fish of the sea and the reptiles that crawl shall be unable to distinguish the slave from a brute, then will I argue with you that the slave is a man.
For the present, it is enough to affirm the equal manhood of the Negro race. Is it not astonishing that while we are plowing, planting, and reaping using all kinds of mechanical tools, erecting houses, constructing bridges, building ships, working in metals of brass, iron, copper, silver, and gold, that while we are reading, writing, and ciphering, acting as clerks, merchants, and secretaries, having among us lawyers, doctors, ministers, poets, authors, editors, above all, confessing and worshiping the Christian's God, and looking hopefully for life and immortality beyond the grave, we are called upon to prove that we are men.
Would you have me argue that man is entitled to liberty? That he is the rightful owner of his own body? You have already declared it. Must I argue the wrongfulness of slavery? Is it to be settled by the rules of logic and argumentation as a matter beset with great difficulty, involving a doubtful application of the principle of justice, hard to be understood? How should I look today in the presence of Americans to show that men have a natural right to freedom? To do so would be to make myself ridiculous and to offer an insult to your understanding. There is not a man beneath the canopy of heaven that does not know that slavery is wrong for him.
What? Am I to argue that it is wrong to make men brutes? Rob them of their liberty? Work them without wages? Keep them ignorant of their relations to their fellow men? To beat them with sticks, to flay their flesh with the lash, to load their limbs with irons, to hunt them with dogs, to sell them at auction, to sunder their families, to knock out their teeth, to burn their flesh, to starve them into obedience and submission to their masters? Must I argue that a system thus marked with blood and stained with the pollution is wrong? No, I will not. I have better employments for my time and strength than such arguments would imply.
What then remains to be argued? Is it that slavery is not divine, that God did not establish it, that our doctors of divinity are mistaken?
There is blasphemy in the thought. That which is inhuman cannot be divine. Who can reason such a proposition?
I cannot. The time for such argument is past.
At a time like this, scorching irony
not convincing arguments is needed. Oh, had I the ability and could I reach the nations here, I would today pour out a fiercing stream of biting, ridicule, blasting reproach, withering sarcasm, and sneer rebuke. For it is not the light that is needed, but fire. It is not the gentle shower, but thunder. We need the storm, the whirlwind, and the earthquake. The feeling of the nation must be quickened, the conscience of the nation must be roused, the propriety of the nation must be startled, the hypocrisy of the nation must be exposed, and its crimes against God and man must be proclaimed and denounced.
There is not a nation on the earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of these United States at this very hour. Go where you may, search you where you will, roam through all the monarchies and despotisms of the old world, search out every abuse, and when you have found the last, lay your facts by the side of the everyday practices of this nation, and you will say with me that for revolting barbarity and shameless hypocrisy, America reigns without a rival.
Take the American slave trade, which is especially prosperous just now and carried on in all the large towns and cities in one half of this confederacy. In several states, this trade is a chief source of wealth. It is called the internal slave trade in order to divert from it the horror with which the foreign slave trade is contemplated. That trade has long since been denounced by this government as piracy, as an execrable traffic. To arrest it, this nation keeps a squadron at immense cost on the coast of Africa. Everywhere in this country, it is safe to speak of this foreign slave trade as a most inhuman traffic opposed alike by the laws of God and of man. It is, however, a notable fact that while so much execration is poured out by Americans upon those engaged in the foreign slave trade, the men engaged in the slave trade between the states pass without condemnation, and the business is deemed honorable.
Behold the practical operation of this internal slave trade, the American slave trade, sustained by American politics and American religion. Here you will see men and women reared like swine for the market. You know what is a swine drover? I will show you a man drover. They inhabit all our southern states. They perambulate the country and crowd the highways of the nation with droves of human stock. You will see one of these human flesh jobbers armed with pistol, whip, and bowie knife, driving a company of 100 men, women, and children from the Potomac to the slave market at New Orleans. These wretched people are to be sold singly or in lots to suit purchasers. They are food for the cotton field and the deadly sugar mill.
Mark the sad procession as it moves wearily along, and the inhuman wretch who drives them. Hear his savage yells and his blood-chilling oaths as he hurries on affrighted captives. There, see the old man with locks thinned and gray. Cast one glance, if you please, upon that young mother, whose shoulders are bare to the scorching sun, her briny tears falling on the brow of the babe in her arms. See, too, that girl of 13, weeping, yes, weeping, as she thinks of the mother from whom she has been torn. The drove moves tardily. Heat and sorrow have nearly consumed their strength. Suddenly, you hear a quick snap, like the discharge of a rifle. The feathers clank and the chains rattle simultaneously. Your ears are saluted with a scream that seems to have torn its way to the center of your soul. The crack you heard was the sound of the slave whip. The scream you heard was from the woman you saw with the babe. Her speed had faltered under the weight of her child and her chains. That gash on her shoulder tells her to move on.
Follow the drove to New Orleans. Attend the auction. See the men examined like horses. See the forms of the women rudely and brutally exposed to the shocking gaze of the American slave buyers. See this drove sold and separated forever, and never forget the deep, sad sobs that arose from that scattered multitude. Tell me, citizens, where under the sun you can witness a spectacle more fiendish and shocking. Yet, this is but a glance at the American slave trade as it exists at this moment in the United States.
Fellow citizens, this murderous traffic is today in active operation in this boasted republic. In the solitude of my spirit, I see clouds of dust raised on the highways of the South. I see the bleeding footsteps, I hear the doleful wail of fettered humanity on the way to the slave markets, where the victims are to be sold like horses, sheep, and swine. Knocked off the highest bidder, there I see the tenderest ties ruthless broken and gratify the lust of caprice and the rapacity of the buyers and sellers of men.
By an act of the American Congress, not yet 2 years old, slavery has been nationalized in its most horrible and revolting form. Mason and Dixon's line has been obliterated. New York has become as Virginia, and the power to hold, hunt, and sell men, women, and children as slaves remain no longer a mere state institution, but is now an institution of the whole United States.
The power is coextensive with the Star-Spangled Banner and American Christianity. Where these go, may also go the merciless slave hunter. Where these are, man is not sacred. He is a bird for the sportsman's gun. But that most foul and fiendish of all human decrees, the liberty and person of every man are put in peril. Your broad Republican domain is hunting ground for men.
Your lawmakers have commanded all good citizens to engage in this hellish sport. Your president, your secretary of state enforce as a duty you owe to your free and glorious country and to your God that you do this accursed thing. Not fewer than 40 Americans have within the past 2 years been hunted down and without a moment's notice warning, hurried away in chains and consigned to slavery and excruciating torture. Some of these have had wives and children dependent upon them for bread, but of this no account was made. The right of the hunter to his prey stands superior to the right of marriage and to all rights in this republic, the rights of God included.
For black men, there are neither law nor justice, humanity nor religion. The fugitive slave law makes mercy to them a crime and bribes the judge who tries them. An American judge gets $10 for every victim he consigns to slavery, and 5 when he fails to do so. The oath of any 2 villains is sufficient under this hell-black enactment to send the most pious and exemplary black man into the remorseless jaws of slavery. His own testimony is nothing. He can bring no witnesses for himself. The minister of American justice is bound by the law to hear but one side, and that side is the side of the oppressor. Let this damning fact be perpetually told. Let it be thundered around the world that in tyrant-killing, king-hating, people-loving, democratic Christian America, the seats of justice are filled with judges who hold their offices under an open and palpable bribe and are bound in deciding the case of a man's liberty to hear only his accusers.
In glaring violation of justice and shameless disregard of the forms of administering law and cunning arrangement to entrap the defenseless, and in a diabolical intent, this fugitive slave law stands alone on the annals of tyrannical legislation.
Americans, your Republican politics, not less than your Republican religion, are flagrantly inconsistent. You boast of your love of liberty, your superior civilization, and your pure Christianity. while the whole political power of the nation is solemnly pledged to support and perpetuate the enslavement of 3 million of your countrymen. You hurl anathemas at the crowned head tyrants of Russia and Austria, and pride yourselves on democratic institutions, while you yourselves consent to be the mere tools and bodyguards of tyrants of Virginia and Carolina. You invite to your shores fugitives of oppression from abroad, honor them with banquets, greet them with ovations, cheer them, toast them, salute them, protect them, and pour out your money to them like water. But the fugitives from your own land, you advertise, you hunt, you arrest, you shoot, and kill.
You discourse eloquently on the dignity of labor, yet you sustain a system which in its very essence casts a stigma upon labor.
You can bare your bosom to the storm of British artillery to throw off a 3-penny tax on tea, and yet wring the last hard-earned farthing from the grasp of the black laborers of your country.
You profess to believe that of one blood God made all nations of men to dwell on the face of all the earth, and hath commanded all men everywhere to love one another. Yet you notoriously hate, and glory in your hatred, all men whose skins are not colored like your own.
You declare before the world, and are understood by the world to declare, that you hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And yet you hold securely in bondage, which, according to your own Thomas Jefferson, is worse than the ages that which your fathers rose in rebellion to oppose, a 7th part of the inhabitants of your country.
Fellow citizens, I will not enlarge further on your national inconsistencies. The existence of slavery in this country brands your republicanism as a sham, your humanity a base pretense, and your Christianity as a lie. It destroys your moral power abroad. It corrupts your politicians at home. It saps the foundation of religion. It makes your name a hissing and byword to a mocking earth. Be warned, a horrible reptile is coiled up in your nation's bosom. The venomous creature is nursing at the tender breast of your youthful republic. For the love of God, tear away and fling from you the hideous monster, and let the weight of 20 million crush and destroy it forever.
Allow me to say in conclusion, notwithstanding the dark picture I have the day present of the state of the nation, I do not despair of this country. There are forces in the operation which must inevitably work the downfall of slavery. I therefore live where I began with hope, while drawing from the Declaration of Independence the great principle it contains and the genius of American institution. My spirit is shared by the obvious tendency of the age. Nations do not stand in the same relation with each other that they did ages ago. No nation can now shut itself up from the surrounding world and trot around in the same old path of its father without interference.
The time was when such could be done. But a change has now come over the affairs of mankind. Walls, cities, and empires have become unfashionable. The arm of commerce has borne away the gates of the strong city. Intelligence is penetrating the darkest corners of the globe. Wind, steam, and lightning are its chartered agents. Oceans no longer divide, but link nations together. From Boston to London is now a holiday excursion. Space is comparatively annihilated. Thoughts expressed on one side of the Atlantic are distinctly heard on the other. In the fervent aspirations of William Lloyd Garrison, I say, and let every heart join in saying it.
All Godspeed the day when human blood shall cease to flow, and every clime be understood, the claims of human brotherhood,
and each return for evil good,
not blow for blow.
That day will come, all feuds to end,
and change into a faithful friend each foe.
Hi, I'm Rich Colucci, Ward 4 City Councilor. Thanks to everybody that participated in this program. I want to wish everybody a safe and a happy 4th of July. God bless America.
Oh, the car emancipation rides majestic through our nation, bearing on its train the story, liberty, a nation's glory. Roll it along, roll it along, roll it along through the nation, freedom's car emancipation. Roll it along, roll it along, roll it along through the nation, freedom's car emancipation. First of all, a train and greater speeds the dauntless liberator, onward cheered amid hosannas and the waving of free banners. Roll it along, roll it along, roll it along, spread your banners while the people shout hosannas. Roll it along, roll it along, roll it along, spread your banners while the people shout hosannas. Let the ministers and churches leave behind sectarian lurches, jump on board the car of freedom ere it be too late to need them. Sound the alarm, sound the alarm, sound the alarm, puppets thunder ere too late you see your blunder. Sound the alarm, sound the alarm, sound the alarm, puppets thunder ere too late you see your blunder. Railroads to emancipation cannot rest on clay foundation, and the tracks of the magician are but railroads to perdition. Pull up the rails, pull up the rails, pull up the rails, emancipation cannot rest on such foundation. Pull up the rails, pull up the rails, pull up the rails, emancipation cannot rest on such foundation.
All true friends of emancipation, haste to freedom's railroad station. Quick into the cars, get seated, all is ready and completed.
Put on the steam, put on the steam,
put on the steam, all are crying and the liberty flags are flying.
Put on the steam, put on the steam,
put on the steam, all are crying and the liberty flags are flying.
Hear the mighty car wheels humming, now look out, the engine's coming. Church and statesmen hear the thunder, clear the track or you'll fall under. Get off the track, get off the track, get off the track, all are singing while the Liberty Bell is ringing. Get off the track, get off the track, get off the track, all are singing while the Liberty Bell is ringing.